we're going to solve systems of inequalities word problems. So inequalities are these symbols, greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. But when you have a word problem, they're not going to always say greater than. They might say more than or exceeds. There are lots of different words for each symbol. So take a minute, stop the video, and look over the different ways these symbols could be represented in words. Okay, so in looking at these words, what we want you to see is that when you have an inequality, it creates what we call a constraint. A constraint is a limitation. It's a value that we either have to stay under or go over. So for example, if it says it has to be at least 5, then it has to be 5 or more. So here's a word problem we're going to look at. Now, we're going to start off thinking about this the same way we did our equations, but when it comes to the actual solving part, it's going to be a bit different. So Susie wants to earn at least $120 per week in the summer. She can work a maximum of 30 hours each week. She earns $6 an hour babysitting and $5 an hour mowing lawns. Susie's trying to decide how many hours to work at each job. So what we're trying to figure out, that's our variables. We're trying to figure out how many hours she should work at each job. So we'll identify those variables, and B will represent the hours she spends babysitting, and M is going to represent the hours she spends mowing lawns. Now, when we were doing equations, we would get right into writing the equations, but we need to think about our constraints before we can do that. So in the first sentence, it tells us she wants to earn at least $120. So that's a constraint. She wants at least $120. And if you put this in terms of inequalities and their symbols, it's going to look like this. It needs to be greater than or equal to $120. Now, the second constraint we have is that she can only work a maximum of 30 hours. So in terms of inequalities, again, maximum of 30 means she can't work more than 30. So that's going to be less than or equal to 30. So now that we know those two constraints, we're ready to write our inequalities. So the first box here tells me we want to write an inequality that represents the number of hours that Susie can work. So when we're thinking about this, she's going to spend some number of hours babysitting and some number of hours mowing the grass. So B represents our hours babysitting, and M represents our hours mowing grass. And what we're going to do is we're going to add those two things together because she's going to do both jobs. Now our constraint here for our hours is she can only work a maximum of 30. So the babysitting and the mowing the grass have to be less than or equal to 30 hours. That's my first inequality. The second inequality we're going to write represents the amount of money that she can make. So this is going to be a similar type of inequality, except we have to think about money. So we're going to have our hours babysitting, but we also need to think about how much money does she make babysitting, and we're going to multiply those two together. So she's going to get $6 for every hour she babysits, and she's going to get $5 for every hour she mows the grass. Oops, let me make that look more like an M for mowing the grass. And finally, let's think about our constraint here. It says she wants to earn at least $120. So all the money babysitting and all the money mowing grass has to be at least greater than or equal to $120. Okay? Now here's where things change up a little bit. So I'm going to start off by writing these two inequalities here. Okay, so bear with me for just a second while I write them out. I do want to keep my colors the same, and there's a reason for that. I'll explain it at the end. Okay, and my second equation would be 6 hours babysitting and 5 hours mowing grass. And that needs to be more than $120. Okay, so we're not going to use elimination like we did before. What we're going to do is kind of a guess and check strategy here. So we need to think a little bit about what we know. We're going to start with this equation over here. And we know that we need to be less than 30. So we need two numbers that when we add them together, they're less than or equal to 30. So again, remember, this is guess and check. So the first thing I'm going to check is 15. If she spends 15 hours babysitting and 15 hours mowing the grass, that will equal 30 hours. So she will be within that constraint that we have here. Now the next thing we have to check is to make sure if she works 15 hours babysitting, that she's going to make enough money. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to take the $6 an hour and multiply that by 15. And we're going to take our $5 an hour for mowing grass and multiply that by 15. And we're going to hope that she'll make at least $120. Now, again, this is guess and check. We're not sure. So when I multiply 6 times 15, I get 90. And when I multiply 5 times 15, I get 75. And when I add the two of those things together, I get 165, which means that if she works if she works for 15 hours babysitting and 5 hours mowing grass, she will earn $165. So she'll be above the constraints that she needs, above $120. So if I were going to write this in words, I would say that Susie can work, or let's make it shorter. Susie can babysit for 15 hours and mow grass for 15 hours and be within her constraints. And if you don't like that word constraints, you can think of it as limits. Okay? Now, as I said, this is guess and check, so we're not going to do this last part over again, but I want to show you there's more than one answer for this. Okay? So let me clear this work off, and I'm just going to show you another set of answers that could possibly work, because there's going to be a lot. Remember, inequalities have multiple solutions, so many, 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 many types of solutions. So what if I picked 10 hours babysitting? Oops, let me get back to my pen. 10 hours babysitting and 15 hours mowing the grass. Okay, that would be 25 hours total, which is less than or equal to 30, so that is within my constraint here. And then, if I come over here and I do 6 times 10 plus 5 times 15, we want it to be over 120. Well, 6 times 10 is 60. 5 times 15 is 75. Oops, sorry. And 60 plus 75 is 135, which again would mean she'd be above the constraint. So when you do these problems, okay, or within our constraints, when you do these problems, there are lots of possible answers. So don't worry if you and your friend get something different. As long as you meet both of your limitations, you're fine.